I'd like to thank you all for joining me on that little adventure back to 1510 to discuss the three maps, the Juan de la Casa, the Ruche, and the Waldseemüller map, and where they came from and what they were in fact all about. The concept of this whole program is to talk about what I consider the world's most valuable treasure map, which is one of these three. I'll explain which one as we go through this. The critical things that people need to know and understand is number one, Cristobal Colon, which we call Columbus, was in fact a Spaniard. He was not an Italian. I was thoroughly convinced of that with a TV program about that, and the thing that convinced me the most was that all of his writings, his logs, ship logs, his books and so forth about his adventures were all written in Spanish. A person born and raised in Italy and who learned navigation in Italy would probably have written in his own language, which he would be more comfortable with. One could argue otherwise, but there were enough other things in that TV program that made me believe that he was lying. Not to mention that he lied so much in his career that there's no reason why we shouldn't expect that he was lying about who he was. Now, the second thing that he lied about, when he first sailed to the New World, he came across and he landed in the Bahamas, somewhere up in this area here, although this map is somewhat warped because it's based on Columbus's own information. And by modern day knowledge at that time, he knew that he should be on the southernmost islands of Japan by latitude. Now, longitude was very difficult to calculate. They could do it by lunar navigation at nighttime, checking the location of the planets and checking the location of the moon, and where they knew it should be and how many degrees off it was, told them how many degrees west they were of wherever they were sailing from, whether it was Spain or England, which is basically a similar longitude. But the latitude was very simple to determine. Latitude could be calculated by looking up at the stars, knowing the constellation and the stars in the constellation, and certain stars and certain stars and certain constellations hit the skyline when you're at a specific latitude. Other stars, if you went north, you had different stars hitting the latitude or hitting the skyline. If you went further south until you hit the equator, you'd find different stars hitting it. So latitude was very simple. But Columbus reported the islands that he discovered after the Bahamas to be north of the Tropic of Cancer, which is this line right here, and you can see how it's pushed north of it. You can see in the Ruche map, Cuba and Hispaniola are both totally north of the Tropic of Cancer. And you can even see that in the Juan de la Casa map, which is more linear, the dark line being the Tropic of Cancer in that particular case. Why would Columbus have been mistaken about something so obviously incorrect that he would have been lost in sailing? He wouldn't. He lied. And why did he lie? Because he knew if he came back and none of the things they knew about the location of Japan or China would have been correct, meaning he would not have discovered the far west or the far east. He would have in fact discovered something new. He also knew that if that were true and he didn't bring anything of value back, there's no reason for Isabella or anybody else to pay for another trip to this land across the Atlantic. And so he lied. And because he lied, Isabella sent him back in 1492 and 1493 to the Bahamas. Well, actually to Cuba and Hispaniola. He also went back on, that was 1493, 1496 was his second trip, and he did all that around here. He refused to go behind Cuba because he was claiming Cuba was China, and there should be no behind it. So he didn't want any of the sailors coming into this area to go into what we call the Gulf of Mexico. So all that was a lie. He went back on his second trip and did what he could, but could not prove anything, and so he was still lying to Isabella and Ferdinand as to exactly what he found here, and that's why Isabella and Ferdinand sent Juan de la Cosa and Ojeda over there to see if there's something they could find out that could prove that Columbus was lying. And in fact, they found the Cabot logbooks. They ran into the Cabot ship. My guess is most of the men on the ship were already dead or dying. Whether the logbook indicated that there was some a ship that went back, or maybe Cabot himself claimed to the Spanish that he had sent the ship back with another copy of the log. That could have happened too. But in any case, he created, or there was certainly a fear that a ship might have been sailing back to England with another copy of the logbooks, which would have proven all that coastline was in fact first discovered by the English, not the Spanish, especially this crossing of Panama. Now, my theory is what happened at Panama is by the time Cabot got down here, his ship was so eaten up with the saltwater worms that destroyed the wood in the ship that they had to take it out of the water, and they put into a cove that seemed hospitable. It didn't have mountains in the distance. And while he was having the ships, possibly even tearing one ship apart to make it one of the two ships he had left sailable, leaving the other one still on the beach, unable to be sailed. While they were doing that, he could have taken the river up to the lake in Panama and then another river down and actually discovered the Pacific salt water and wrote about that in his logbooks. Also about the fact that he and his men were dying from malaria once they crossed that. Now, Columbus came back after his third voyage in 1500 when Juan de la Casa had just shipped this, and Isabella put him in chains. And they've got all kinds of justifications and reasons for that, but undoubtedly the biggest reason was she knew he had been lying all along. Another reason we know about it is because Isabella sent him back on a fourth voyage in 1502. He was there from 1502 to 1504, and in this voyage, this was the only voyage that Columbus actually made it all the way to the coast of what we now call Central America. He was told to go to a specific latitude and to look for a bay with a river that went up to a lake and went back down into another saltwater ocean. Isabella was literally sending him to the Panama Mosquito Coast with a clear idea that he was going to die of malaria for being there. This was in her mind a death penalty for Columbus. And Columbus and his ship sailed up and down around that numerous times, but refused to stop there. And what obviously happened is some of the sailors with Columbus on that fourth voyage had been with Juan de la Casa and heard about the ship that they discovered from England that had everybody on board dying of malaria. So that was a very important aspect in itself. Juan de la Casa was the first one to give them the idea of it, but now they needed a couple of things. First of all, they needed a way to claim this as their own, and the use of the term America, I have no doubt that America was written on the John Cabot maps. Why? Because America was one of the people in Bristol that funded the Cabot's voyages in 1497 or 1498. Well, both of them actually. And so I have no doubt, but he had it up in the Northern America part. They thought by moving the America term to South America, they could claim that the English copied their maps and moved the term America, but they had to come up with why there was a term America. And that's where Amerigo Vespucci comes in. It turns out that the papacy knew that Amerigo Vespucci had sent a letter to Italy, to one of the dukes in Italy, saying that he had been with Juan de la Casa and Ojeda on the trip to South America, and he had wrote a very detailed letter about this, which was thrilling. It was actually like a penny novel in the Victorian England. It talked about nudity and sex and cannibalism and murder and mayhem, all the things people love to read about. And so the papacy obviously had access to that letter, and they sent that letter and 3 other letters, supposedly by Vespucci, to Waldseemüller and Ringman to write about in their world map of 1507, in the book that had all the latitudes and longitudes in it, the Geographica, And that's why they attributed everything in the New World as being discovered by Amerigo Vespucci. Now, Vespucci was a fitter. He was somebody hired by the Queen or by the captains of the ships to go out and buy the sheets for their sails, the ropes, the lines, all the things they needed, the food and the trading products they would take with them on their trails. He had never been a navigator. There's no reason to believe he knew anything about navigation in 1497, 98. There's no reason to believe he was actually on the boats. He could have gotten all the information he wrote about in his first letter just by listening to the sailors that came back from the trip, who would actually have talked with him as they were fitting up for another voyage going somewhere, whether down South Africa or across to the New World in the west into the Atlantic. So there's no reason to believe that Amerigo Vespucci, and the other three letters, at least two of them are clearly forgeries, and the third one is probably forgery as well. None of them give any specific information that would indicate that Amerigo Vespucci was in fact capable of navigation. Now later on, he became the chief navigator for the King of Portugal, not so that he could sail, but so that he could collect information from the sailors coming back from both South America, or Southern New World, and Africa, and make that as a map for the King of Portugal. I have no doubt that was set up by either Pope Alexander or Pope Julius II to give him the look of credibility for being able to say this was his map. He's the one that discovered all this land. So that brings us to the last question, which is, how did Waldseemüller get the information to draw a fairly accurate west coast of the Americas? There's only one way that could have happened, and that is if they would have gotten a copy of the Zheng-Ha Chinese charts that were done in 1421, long before all this happened, when the Emperor of China sent Zheng He to seek out tribute from other lands around the Pacific, and he probably did sail the entire west coast of the Americas. What would have been probable is in his logs, they too would have discovered the land at Panama, that you could go up a river, into a lake, down a river, and into another saltwater body, and his people that did that trip would have died of malaria, giving the papacy the ability to tie this area into both the John Cabot charts and the Chinese charts and be able to draw what is in fact a very detailed example of the entire western continents, which we now call North America erroneously, and South America and Central America. So this is the key thing. Now, where does this bring us to as the most valuable treasure map? Rather interestingly, the world's most valuable treasure map is the one behind me. First, because it deeded all this property from what would be around Chesapeake, which is there on the Rush map. From that point south would have all belonged without question to Spain, including the ability to get across this continent into the Pacific, and as we know, another route to bring treasure back from the Far East. A lot of ships sailed between Japan and China and the Indian Ocean, coming back, dropping their goods off on the west coast of the Americas, in the Central America area, having it brought by mules or llamas or whatever they had to the east coast, and then a ship taking it from there back to Spain. So that explains everything about this particular map. That means all the gold from the Aztecs, from the Incas, from Central America, all the treasures that were in fact brought back by the Spanish could have been English and would not have ended up being paid tribute to the papacy. So the papacy made literally millions based on this map here. Now, the second reason this is the most valuable treasure map in the world is when it was discovered in the early 1900s that this map still existed, they had thought the Waldseemüller map was totally gone. They found, I believe in Germany, one last copy of this map, and Congress ultimately paid $10 million for that last original Waldseemüller map. Now I'd say $10 million is a pretty good treasure map. So between all the riches that came over to Spain from the Americas, all the money that they paid for, the Congress paid for that, and they did that because the word America is on the map. So in my mind, the map behind me is the world's most valuable treasure map. Thank you for joining me in this little adventure. I hope you learned something, and certainly you'll have a lot of questions I'm sure you'll want to find answers to yourself. Good luck on your adventures in finding those answers.